Hey everyone, welcome back to MCReviews. This is my third episode reviewing the second Monstercat album, Early Stage. So we're going to kick off right where I left you last episode with We Move by Feint, then Lost by TwoThirds, Another World by Obsidia, Dreaming by Project 46, Bassex by Arion, and then we'll finish off the whole review by giving some general thoughts on the album as a whole. So the first track we're going to be talking about today is We Move by Feint. And so I'm sure I explained the last time we talked about Feint, but I am a massive Feint fan. Things like Snake Eyes, Homebound, Fury, and Lone Song are some of my favourite drum and bass tracks on the label. And considering how much I liked his last song, I was really optimistic to see how this one would turn out. And so We Move is Feint's second drum and bass track on the label. This time though, he seemed to go for a bit of a lighter, a little bit of a happier approach to the genre, with a little bit more emphasis on melody and less on the bass than his last track. So the song starts off with a few quite happier, more synthy melodies, some giving me a bit of a ravey vibe. A fast drum and bass beat comes in and a couple more melodies are added. The intro doesn't really last long before it drops out straight into the build-up, and the build-up's pretty generic, it's just melodies building up in pitch. But there is no drum climax, as in, there is no drums getting faster, which is generally a good thing, because that's such a average thing. I've heard it so many times in so many songs to have that build-up be like that. So I'll give the song props for not having a 100% generic build-up, but it is still not outstanding at all. And so it drops into quite a chaotic mix of melody and bass and beat. And so the melodies, they're still quite happy and a little bit ravier. They still got that dramatic feel that Feint does well, but not quite to the darker level, which his last song did quite well. The bass is good. The bass does sound very fainty, as in it's quite fast, it's quite growly, but it's not too prominent in this song, and I think I would prefer it to be a little bit more prominent. Also has quite a generic drum and bass beat. It is quite nice and loud, and it's not too fast, but it is very standard. So the second half of the drop is a lot nicer. The melodies become a lot less synthy or ravey. They also become a bit quieter and more backgroundy. They become more muffled. It sounds like he put the melody into a pad with a whole bunch of reverb. And so that's good because it leaves a bit more room, having the melody fall to the back. It leaves a bit more room for the bass and the drums to come out, which is nice. And so it just makes the second half of the drop more drum and bass oriented with just some nice melodic backing, and I do like that. The drop ends with pretty much everything dropping out except for the pad. The pad does stay in, and within a couple seconds the beat and the bass are quickly reintroduced, and it forms the breakdown in between the two drops. I guess maybe you could call it the second drop, but I'm going to call it the breakdown just for the sake of convenience. It goes from there into a second build-up, and this build-up, you know, it's fine, it's pretty standard, but it's still better than most, I guess, but definitely not standout. And the second drop is pretty much, it starts off pretty much the same as the first, which is quite disappointing. The second half of the second drop is a little bit different. He takes out the bass and just leaves the beat and the melody, which is okay, but it sort of does take away from the kick and the punch that drum and bass has from the bass. But it's better than just repeating what he did for the first drop, I suppose. So he wraps up the song by removing the beat and slowly fading the melody out. My biggest issue with this song is that at times it can sound a bit muddy, as in, especially in the drops, the sounds can blur a little bit, and I feel like this does quite show that this was in his start, he was early to making music, and so he didn't quite understand how to get the levels right, and how to get elements of the song to sound different from one another. And so it is interesting to see how he's come from that to where he is now, where each sound does sound well placed and distinguished. In this one, they do sort of blur together a bit. They are a little bit muddy, and that can make it feel a little bit... my main experience with it was I was listening to it through quite good headphones, but it made it sound like I was listening through worse headphones just because of the way that the sounds are blurred and didn't come out individually. It's a small gripe, and I doubt it would affect most people, but I did notice it, and that was quite irritating. But I do like the drops. The drops, they have that really great dramatic feel that Feint does so well. He didn't do it quite as well in this song as he did in his last song. His last song was a little darker, a little bit more dramatic, but this one still has that chaotic, dramatic, sort of race against time feel, which I really like that. But the song still doesn't really have anything outstanding. The beats are average, the bass is good but never great, and the melodies can be good but are mostly not that great. And this certainly isn't Feint's best work, and that's why I'm going to be giving it a 5 out of 10, because honestly, most of the song is average. It's never bad, but it's mostly just average with a few good touches, like the pad half of the first drop. But as a whole song, it's quite forgettable, and to me, it's one of Feint's most average songs. So, the second track I'm going to be talking about today is Lost by TwoThirds. And damn, I'm really excited to talk about this track, because this, I think, is the first ever chill song released on Monstercat, and I really love chill. It's one of my favorite genres of electronic, because it has so much more of an emphasis on sounding emotional than most genres. You know, chill music, it can make you happy, sad, lonely, comforted, and all from what many people seem to consider quite a basic genre. And while a lot of chill songs, there may not be as much that's explicitly going on, these songs often work much more to see how they can get the entire piece of music to make you feel something, more than just the moment-to-moment sounds of most songs. Chill tries to bring a lot more atmosphere in the way that most genres really don't try, and that's something that I just love. So this song, it's not only chill, but it's also drum and bass. And chill drum and bass, or liquid drum and bass, whatever you want to call it, when it's done right, it's the perfect marriage of two of my favorite genres, and damn is it great. And to complete the triforce of greatness behind the song, it is made by one of Monstercat's most talented drum and bass producers, TwoThirds. And while he doesn't always make drum and bass, when he does, it's just great. Some examples being Universal and Origami, and even this song, Lost. TwoThirds are one of those artists that just have so much variation, from great house like Waking Dreams to electro like Skywards and the aforementioned drum and bass. He seems to be able to make just about anything. So this track, Lost, it's a very long track, and so this might be quite a long review, but let's get started. So the song starts with quite a nice drum and bass beat. It's not too traditional for drum and bass. It's much more hat and snare focused, less kick focused than most drum and bass beats, and I really like that. It's got a ambient backing, which is it's a very smooth pad in the backing. It's nice and relaxing, and I really like that. There's a nice calm and slow melody which is added along with a quiet backing ding, which adds to sort of every beat. Then at around about 45 seconds after the melody added earlier builds up very slightly, the song sort of cuts everything out except for that smooth backing pad I was talking about earlier, and it adds a really nice vocal chop. It isn't saying anything that I can understand, at least it's not saying anything in English, but it's a really nice sound, and it adds to the really calm feel that the song has done so well so far. It also adds a kind of beep melody. It almost sounds like a heart rate monitor from a hospital. It's really cool, and it works really well on the song. This part is basically the first breakdown, but it can be hard to tell with this song as it's much less obvious in telling you where the breakdowns and drops start or end. There's another dreamy melody which is added, and it sort of almost makes me think of Stars, mainly because it's quite high-pitched and quite dingy and has a lot of reverb, and it's really, really nice. The build-up to the drop is really, really cool. It's very unconventional. It has no melody or beat speed up or increase in pitch. Instead, it has an almost metallic and dark sounding bass that slowly and smoothly builds in the backing. And to me, this is really, really cool. And then there's the drop. And this is where the whole song kind of comes together. The pad, melody, and the beat from the start, as well as the melody that made me think of Stars from earlier, all comes together. And it just sounds great. Well, everything, it's quite low-key and much more subtle than most melodies you'd hear in EDM. it's still really fast and complex, and the melodies all come together so well and play off each other so well, it just sounds like one layered and complex melody. It's so relaxing, and it's almost thoughtful in its sound, and I just love it. Everything in the beat is great too. It's really fast, which makes the whole song more engaging. It has a bunch of samples, so the loop doesn't wear out as much as most looped beats do. And it's in quite an unconventional pattern as well, which is just really great. And yeah, so this beat is great. It reminds me of how Direct can make a chill song fast with a great beat without compromising the feel of the song. An example of that coming to mind would be something like Lark. There are some really nice touches in this drop. Things like little orchestral sounding cymbals that come in every so often. And so the second half of the drop, it kind of replaces that melody, which made me think of Stars from earlier, with the heart rate monitor melody from the breakdown. And this part, it's still awesome, but in my mind, it loses the synergy that the Stars melody and the melody from the intro had together. But this second half is still fine. And like I said earlier, it's quite hard to pin down when the drop ends and when the breakdown starts. But the point where I most think that the second breakdown starts is when one of those orchestral cymbals comes in and the beat and melody drop out of the song. So this second breakdown, it's pretty cool. It brings the dreaminess and sleepiness that's been through the song sort of to a whole new level by reducing the song to basically just that smooth pad from earlier and an almost ambient sounding something. I don't really know if it's a bass or if it's a melody, but it sounds almost like waves rolling in and out, and it works really well with the backing pad, and it's really quite nice. Soon though, the vocal chop from the first breakdown is added, as well as a quiet backing beat that almost sounds like clapping sticks, and this is a really good addition. The melody from the intro is also added, and soon after that, the build-up happens again with that cool bass from the first build-up. And then we have the second drop, which to me, it starts off sounding almost exactly the same as the first, just with that ambient wave noise that was from the second breakdown comes in, and it accompanies the backing pad. And so with this drop, instead of taking out the Stars melody halfway through like it did in the first drop, he just adds the heart rate melody on top of everything else. It just adds a bunch of complexity to what is already complex and just adds to it, and it's really nice. And so the song wraps up by stripping most of the melodies and the beat out. It reintroduces that clapping stick beat from earlier and fades out with that ambient wave backing that I was talking about. So yeah, I'm sure you've noticed that I really do love this song. It's just, to me, it does exactly what it seems like it sets out to do. The song is called Lost, so you would expect it to sound lonely, and it does that really well, but it's more than that. It's hopeful and it's relaxing as well. And this is a really great way for chill to start off on the label, I reckon, and I'm really happy this is how 2/3 was introduced as well. And everything in the song has a whole bunch of reverb, like pretty much everything has a bunch of reverb, and it just gives the song a really nice, calm and sleepy feel. It's really relaxing, and it doesn't sound like trance music, but had I have not heard trance music, I would have thought this was quite like trance, just because it does have that sort of feel where you just fall into it. It does take you into a trance, sort of. And so, like I was talking about with trance, the song does kind of remind me of Tanpopo in the way that it just sort of ambles around at its own pace. And it can make it quite hard to describe the song, but it also makes it unique. And uniqueness is one of the first things I look out for when listening to a track, and that just really adds to this track, and the uniqueness is great. And this track is probably the first great track in my mind ever released on Monstercat. While there have been a bunch of really good and awesome tracks, none have connected with me in the way that this one does. None have made me feel anything the way that this one does. And that is how I mark the difference between a really good song. A song like Totally Radical is a great song, but it doesn't make me feel anything. This song, it really does, and that's why I love it so much. And that is why I'm going to be giving this song an 8 out of 10. A great song. One I would never skip and I'd always listen to when I get the chance. So yeah, I just love this track, and I'm really excited to see what I think of the upcoming 2/3 tracks, when I look at them under a more critical eye than I normally would when listening to a track.
I envision another world.
So, today's third track is Another World by Obsidia. And Obsidia isn't quite an artist that I know very well, but from what I've heard, he seems to make that kind of very heavy dubstep that you would associate with early Monstercat. His music seems to be very heavy, kind of in the same way Halo Nova's is, just maybe without the charm of his video game influences. That being said, I honestly don't know if I'm going to like him or not, because I was expecting to hate Halo Nova when I first started reviewing Monstercat, but I really did end up liking him, so I guess we'll just have to see what happens. So this track, it starts with it's a pretty cool melody. It's similar to many early dubstep melodies. It has a bit of an electro feel. It's quite upbeat, quite high-pitched. It's not outstanding or anything. But a really cool little touch is, within the first couple of seconds of the song, a roll of thunder comes in the background, and it's not really what you would have expected with this kind of song, but it does set a nice amount of atmosphere, which is something that I can really get behind. The beat in this intro is also quite good. It's more than just your kick, 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 kick that you hear in a lot of dubstep. It actually has a step in it, as I guess the genre's name would imply. It's less of a straightforward beat, I guess. It's on a pretty long loop for this sort of beat, and I think it's pretty well done. Soon there are some pretty weird high-pitched vocals that sound almost like spoken word, and yeah, they are high-pitched, but they're kind of cool, and they come in and they work decently well. As the song goes along, the melody gets a bit more distorted and it gets a bit more synthy as it works its way towards the drop. The drop, it kind of comes out of nowhere. It has pretty much no build-up that I can discern, but it's pretty damn cool. The drop reminds me a lot of Tut Tut Child's earlier growly and dirty bass sound that he had a lot of. So it has a lot of those really cool growly basses, and they're quite fast and they go up and down in pitch quite a lot, which is something I can really enjoy. The beat, it's not amazing, but it works with the main bass well, because they both sort of happen at the same time, as in when the bass has like a drive, the beat will often kick at the same time, so they work together really well. It is a little bit repetitive, but it does change slightly a couple of seconds in by dampening the highs and the lows quite a bit, and adds quite a minor backing melody. And so this change is okay, but the biggest change of this first drop is when the song, for a little while, pretty much the bass becomes much more segmented, and between each of those segments is a little, probably half a second vocal chop, which fills the blanks, and it sounds really cool. And it almost makes it sound like the vocal chop has heaps of sidechain on it, so that whenever the vocal chop comes in, it drops the rest of the song out. And it's really cool. It adds quite a bit of variation to what would, without it, be quite a repetitive drop. The drop finishes by repeating the two similar segments from the start, and then it goes into a midsection, which is kind of the part with the most of those high-pitched vocals. It has the same beat from the intro, which I commented as being really good. It has some pretty cool synth melodies which come in, and again, it really doesn't have much in the way of build-ups. The second drop is quite similar to the first. The main bass in the drop is a fair bit slower, but it also has more pace and more of a pulsing, or I guess starting and stopping sound, and that's really cool. The biggest and best addition to this little part, I think, is a backing synth which is added behind all the bass. It adds a lot to the feel and the complexity of the song, and it makes me like this drop a lot more than the first, because the first had pretty much nothing in the way of melody, just bass. This has bass and a nice backing melody as well as that pretty decent beat which goes with the bass well. After a little while, the song takes out the backing synth but reintroduces the very minor backing melody from the first drop, just this time it's a little bit louder and a little bit more complex. This goes on for a while until the song almost seems to just end, because basically everything from the song for a couple seconds is stripped out, and the only thing you can hear is a vocal chop saying, "As I close my eyes, I envision another world." And it really does make you think the song's about to end, but then thankfully it doesn't, because my favourite part of the song by far just like jumps in out of nowhere, and it's very similar to earlier with the bass, but it's a lot faster because it has a drum and bass beat, which is probably why I like it so much, because I have a strange addiction to drum and bass. But it keeps those really good basses, and with their really good pace, it strips the melody, but it does have that drum and bass beat, which more than makes up for it. It's not a revolutionary beat, but it is the drum and bass beat, and it is faster than the rest of the song, and it's a nice contrast, and it's great to see the song sped up. And I really do love this part. The song finishes off by bringing back that stop-start bass from earlier, and putting the dubstep beat back in, and taking out the drum and bass one, and then it sort of just ends. And so my highlights for this song are definitely the vocal chop driven part of the first drop, where the vocal chop almost sounds sounds a bit like sidechaining the bass. The drum and bass part and the start-stop part of the second drop, they're really, really cool. And funny enough, I don't even really hate the vocals. I thought I would because of their high-pitched nature. I'm not normally a fan of that sort of stuff. Like, I hated it in, what was it, Blow Explode? That was terrible. But here, I actually think they work quite nicely in the song. And I won't say I wasn't expecting to like this song, but I guess I didn't know enough about the artist or this song to know whether I would. I just sort of assumed, oh, it's early, it's dubstep, I probably won't be all over it. But I certainly do like it. The main reasons I like the song is the bass. It's just so growly and unforgiving. It really does remind me of a Tut Tut Child song, kind of like Maelstrom or Mysterious Stranger, which are two songs I really love. That combined with the mostly awesome beats and melodies bring this song to be one of the highlights of the earlier dubstep for the label, I think, that I've talked about so far. For that reason, I'm going to be giving this song a 7 out of 10. I'm not going to be giving it any higher because I don't think it does anything crazy or original, but what it does very well, and I'm happy to see that it's not just a generic, trashy dubstep track. Okay, Dreaming by Project 46 is the next song we're going to be talking about, and this is the first house song released on the label, and it's really quite a pity because this is the worst type of house, this song. It's generic house, and if you don't know what I mean by generic house, I mean the stuff that generally has, you know, your bog standard vocals about partying or getting drunk or something like that. And it has a drop which is just so repetitive, it'll make you feel like you're playing Mafia 3. For me, this genre is up there with hardstyle for the worst genre I can think of. It's a pity because there is a bunch of house that I actually think is really good, like Waking Dreams or Strung Out, but this, no thanks. So, Project 46 started off on the label making some of Monstercat's worst music, in my opinion, and he continued doing this for a while with their Limitless EP, which poor Pete is reviewing right now. They progressively, no pun intended, started getting better and better as time went along. They have never been great, but in recent albums they have had some pretty catchy tunes like Stars and Signs. They definitely started off pretty horrific, and this song is a prime example of that. The track starts with a admittedly decent beat. It's quite fast and has a nice mix of samples, including a finger click, which I find quite cool, but after a while this beat is removed anyway. There is an almost trance-like melody which is added alongside a vocal chop. The vocal chop soon turns into Monstercat's first ever proper vocals, I guess, and it's quite a pity as Matthew Sartori, I think his name is, in my opinion, just horrific in this song. His vocals are whiny, they're high-pitched, and they're poppy as hell. Admittedly, I am very hard against vocals, but these vocals are just the worst. They are the most bog-standard generic house vocals you could ever find. Well, I guess in that way you could say that it does fit the song. The trance-like melody from earlier ramps up, becoming more and more housey as it goes along. When the vocals are introduced, the melody starts to become louder. The melody keeps getting louder and houseier until at 1 minute 45, and yes, in 1 minute 45, that's all that's happened. After a generic build-up, it drops. And this drop is one of the most insultingly generic and unoriginal drops I've heard in a while, where in an even vaguely competent song, the main lead or melody would change at the drop. Almost nothing here changes. The only things that do are the beat, which is changed a little bit to turn into a generic house beat, a backing crash is introduced, and the vocal chop from the start before the vocals came in. And that's it! The main lead is literally exactly the same, and this drop is so similar that finding where the drop actually starts when skimming through the song is hard, because nothing significant changes at all. The drop goes on for a minute or so, and then goes into another vocal part between the first and second drops. It keeps the lead, but lowers its pitch a little bit and dampens it. The vocals are cut to just say, "I'm dreaming" as a vocal chop, and they lay it over the house melody. And it just goes into another full verse until the second drop comes around with another generic build-up. But it wouldn't be a house song without a practically identical second drop. The only difference here being that we can hear Matthew Sartori's oh so lovely voice layered over it. And the song then just ends by doing the reverse of the intro, basically. It has that trancey melody with a decent beat, then it takes out the melody and just leaves the beat, and then it just sort of fades out. And I'll just start off by saying this song is it's 5.5 minutes. How does a song like this, which such little changing, fit into 5.5 minutes, where a song which has so much changing, like Rat Twists, fits into 4? I don't get it, but it's just terrible. I know I didn't go into as much detail as I normally do with the analysis of this song, but I just honestly couldn't be bothered. It's just so trash. I'm sorry to anyone that likes this kind of house, but to me it's just some of the worst that EDM has to offer, and I'm going to be giving Dreaming by Project 46 a 2 out of 10. I would give it a 1, but I don't feel it's quite that terrible, but it is pretty damn close. So, yeah, it's probably going to be a while before I give a good score to a Project 46 song, but I have no doubt that time will come. So, here we have the last track on Early Stage, Bassex by Arion. And this is Arion's first dubstep track, his second track on the album, and his third track on the label. And in my opinion, it's probably his worst track by far, and probably his worst track by quite a margin. Arion, from what I have heard, seems to be pretty good at making electro, even if he can make some questionable decisions when it comes to using vocal chops. And judging by this song, I think that he should probably stick with electro. Anyway, let's get into the final track on the album, Bassex. So the track starts with quite a low backing pad, and you can hear occasional low backing synths as well, and a melody that progressively gets louder and louder and louder as the song goes along. And once that melody has been properly introduced, a slow clap beat in the background is introduced. There is a slight build in intensity of the backing. It becomes somewhat more distorted as it builds, and then it goes straight into the main build-up of the song. And this intro part, I really do like it quite a bit. When I first heard it, it gave me pretty high hopes for what the song could be, which were let down later, but with the mix of slow speeds, ambient backing, and nice melodies, I reckon this intro works really well. The song, it kind of out of nowhere kicks into a build-up where the melody is put onto a short loop, and the beat speeds up a little bit, and a note that climbs in pitch is added. Halfway through the drop, Arion strikes again with another awful vocal chop. Luckily, in this song, the vocal chop is far less prominent than in his last song, but it's still really annoying, high-pitched, and here it even sounds a little cocky, and none of those are things that I like in vocals. And so the song then drops, and we get maybe the most repetitive and boring dubstep drop I've talked about on this series yet. It's one of those squealy, high-pitched dubstep tracks, kind of like an early Tristam song, and I don't always hate this style of dubstep. An example I really like being Tristam's tracks like Follow Me and Pushed Away. They're really good, but here it's just not used very well at all. Everything in this drop is just too repetitive and too slow. The main melody and the bass is on an incredibly predictable, drawn out and boring loop. The beat is decent, but certainly can't hold the song together, and all the other little things that happen, like the vocal chops and occasional little melodies and basses, are good, but they're not enough either. It's just so boring and uninspired, and it's one of those tracks where you feel like you've already heard it before you've even finished listening to it. The main bass of the drop, it's interesting enough. It's on a decent saw. Those of you who don't know, a saw is a term that EDM producers use for a thing which you can put on a melody or a bass, which will basically cut the frequencies out really fast, and so on the program it sort of looks like the blades of a saw, and that's where it comes from. But the saw here, it's decent. It speeds up the sound of the main bass, but still, again, it isn't enough to save it from the repetitive and slow progression that bass is on. So the drop goes on repeating those elements for around about a minute, and then goes into a breakdown. This breakdown, similar to the intro, it has the same melody and ambient backing, this time with quite a cool, almost nitro fun, retro sound. Makes me think a little bit of Pac-Man effect, and that comes over it. This part is all well and good until it goes into another build-up, which is very similar to the first, has that bad vocal chop, it just does the normal generic go up in pitch, go up in speed, all that. We get to the second drop, and thank God it's different than the first drop, but unfortunately what it changes is, instead of the main bass being on a progression, the bass sort of just sits there and doesn't change for like 10 seconds, and after those 10 seconds, the bass will generally get a bit higher pitched, then after another 10 seconds it will revert to being lower. One cool thing is at very near the end of each of those sort of 10-second cycles, the bass sort of drops in pitch rapidly, and that's pretty cool, but besides that, it's pretty much exactly the same as the first. There are the same little melodies and basses that come in and out. It has the same beat, it has the same occasional vocal chop, but it does have that nitro fun little Pac-Man sound on top of it, which is cool, but again, it's just one of those little things that isn't enough. After it stops going between the high and the low pitch swapping 10-second cycle thing I was talking about earlier, it just repeats a fair bit of the first drop again, and then the song sort of just abruptly ends. I don't really know what's worse, having the first and second drops be the same, or having the second drop have even less going on than your first drop. All I know is that both options are pretty terrible. And this song, to me, is kind of weird, because I don't really hate it, and for a little while, I quite liked the first drop, but it does wear on you quick, and it's just way too repetitive, and it does outstay its welcome for me. The song, it does show some potential in the way that the bass has that pretty decent saw on it, but as a whole, it's still not a great track. I do like Arion as an artist, as besides this song, I do really like parts of Blow Explode, and I do enjoy parts of Cold Blood and Ice Cream Cones, but this is definitely his worst work so far, and I'm going to be giving it a 4 out of 10. Hopefully in future he can make more electro and less dubstep, but something's telling me that's not the case. Okay, so to wrap up how I feel about this album as a whole, I think that Monstercat 002 Early Stage pretty much lived up to what I expected. I expected there to be quite a lot of dubstep, I expected it not to be quite as good or varied as recent albums, and I expected to love some tracks and hate others. And to me, this definitely isn't a standout album. Where album 1 was special because it was the first ever, this one doesn't really have that merit. It's definitely got some pretty damn good tracks, but it also has some pretty trash ones too. I'll start with the positives. My highlights for the album were Tanpopo, Totally Radical, and Lost. All three of these tracks in their own way were just great. Tanpopo for its surprising and cool second half of the drops, Totally Radical for the great level of variation in sound and feel, and Lost for the incredible atmosphere, beats, melody, and overall feel of the song. There are points at which this album is decent. It's not incredible, but certainly good, such as Another World, We Move, Airwaves, Blow Explode, Rock the House, Light Pollution, and some wobbles. There were a couple of letdowns on this album, like Triceratops, Metropolis, and Bassex, but the only real low points of the album for me are Dreaming and Obsession, which to me are just some of the worst tracks I've reviewed yet. Obsession with its mind-numbing hardstyle beat and melodies, and Dreaming being one of the most basic and unoriginal tracks I've heard in quite a while. Things like that are why it can be hard to properly rate a compilation album such as this. It can feel unfair, a great song like Lost with a horrific song like Dreaming, but I guess it is my job to try my best to score it. So, when I get the average score of all these tracks on the album put together, it is a score of 5.46, and I feel that score might be a bit generous just towards how I feel about it as a whole, and I feel like the whole album is kinda under average for Monstercat. If you compare it to an average modern day album, this, at least to me, is pretty lacking. And so was 01, but I couldn't look past its significance, and I gave it a higher score because of that. But looking at all of Monstercat's albums, this is certainly under average. Not massively, but I do feel that it certainly is, and for that reason I'm going to be giving Monstercat 002 Early Stage 4 out of 10. Okay, so let me know if I'm being too harsh on the album, or if I'm maybe even being too easy. Which of these tracks do you love or hate? Is it better than the first album? Let me know all these things in the comments below. I love all your feedback. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time with my review of Monstercat 003 Momentum.